Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation.
Welcome to the Contrary, a weekly discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, the first insurrection at the U.S. Capitol since the War of 1812 in 1814, and Congress certifies the election of President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Where do we go from here? With us this week are former Representative Donna Edwards, a Democrat from Maryland, Patrice Leon-Wuka of the Independent Women's Forum, Rina Shabarara of Republican Women for Biden, and Deborah Carnahan, former judge and federal prosecutor. Welcome, ladies. Where do we go from here, starting with you, Donna Edwards? What happens next? Quite frankly, the Democrats are usually extremely reluctant to do to the Republicans what the Republicans are more than happy to do to the Democrats, which is to say, use the rules of the Senate to, some would say, steal such things as U.S. Supreme Court seats from the other party. Is this going to be a Democratic Party that will finally make real use, complete use of the powers it has, such as punishing President Trump for inciting insurrection and putting in jail people who have committed crimes under the Trump administration?
Well, I think Democrats are going to use the power that they have, both controlling the Senate and the House and the White House, to govern, to bring real change for the American people, to make sure that we get a handle of the coronavirus pandemic, and to hold accountable those who need to be held accountable. And I don't think it's about like sort of erasing the past or just looking forward. There has to be a measure of accountability, and I think Democrats are prepared to do the kind of oversight that did not take place when Republicans had control of the Senate and the White House. And that accountability and that kind of oversight is going to take place right now. And those who need to be held accountable, I think Democrats are going to be responsible in governing and making sure that that's true, because we don't want to repeat this at any time in our future. Where we are right now is a really dark day and a dark stain on democracy. And I think in order to get control of that, Democrats both have to look backwards and they have to govern forwards.
My greatest concern, as many Americans are concerned, is what happens in the next 2 weeks while this president is still in power. And then, of course, we're going to have to look into what the failures were with the Capitol Police. I've been dealing with the Capitol Police for over 16 years now. They're a very professional group of people, but there was a systematic failure yesterday as we all watched the events unfold.
All right, Patrice, you are not an official supporter of President Trump. Your organization is not, but you certainly have not disagreed with him on any policy measures. Did he step over the line with inciting insurrection in your mind?
In my mind, yes, President Trump stepped over the line. I was very disappointed in the things that he said during the rally that encouraged people to leave there thinking, number one, that they're marching up to the Capitol, or even some of the efforts by Republican members of Congress would overturn the election. I think people had that in their mind when they went up there. And I agree, it was ridiculous. It was totally indefensible it was rioting. Now, I do think, though, that when we think about the next 2 weeks, I'm sure there's going to be some regulations. I'm actually looking forward to some good, positive labor regulations to protect independent contractors in this country and other things. And I do worry, though, when I hear people say, well, the president may go insane or may do things that would be harmful. I think from a policy standpoint, so many conservatives, if they truly would admit it, they have been pleased with the tax policy, the economic policy, the immigration policy, the foreign policy out of this administration. And so I don't think I don't anticipate anything going crazy. And I do believe that President Trump, in releasing a statement, or the White House releasing a statement this morning, saying that there is going to be a peaceful transfer of power, should at least allay some of those fears.
Well, but first of all, I mean, there were crimes committed here, such as insurrection. There's been talk of invoking the 25th Amendment. Vice President Pence certainly recognized finally, after being the closest ally this very abnormal, highly abnormal president could ever have hoped for, finally recognized he was not, this was it, and he was not crossing over the line of trying to not certify the incoming administration. Do you think the 25th Amendment should be invoked, that he should be found unfit for office?
I don't. I think when you're talking about his mental capacities, that's for for the medical professionals who see him on a regular basis to make that determination. I think it's hard for those on the outside to say, well, I'm going to cherry pick a tweet here or there and say, oh, that absolutely rises to the level.
You can't say an occasional tweet or a rare tweet. It's been nonstop.
Well, and I would say that the American citizen, the American electorate actually spoke. So, I mean, he's got 2 weeks left in office. I think at this point, if we really want to move forward, let's think about what's going to happen after that. I'm not for, and I even though I understand there's some Republicans who are now joining the chorus, I still don't see politically how it's going to happen. And I don't see enough cabinet members stepping up to say that that they would support that effort.
This is our president of the United States. We don't need a psychiatrist to say he's not fit for office. We have what has been going on in the recent events of this week to show us that there was evidence out there that the dark web was talking about this. There were instructions. This was no huge surprise what happened at the Capitol this week. The plans were out there. You want to talk about just a few people that did this? Well, it was a lot of people, but it was orchestrated. They came with weapons. They came with Molotov cocktails. They came with explosives. And this was not just, oh, wow, we're just getting out of control here. This was planned. And it was not just egged on, it was instructed by the president to march, to come, to go. It reminded me of the Wicked Witch of the West. I was thinking this morning, telling her monkeys to fly, and go after people. And that's what he did.
All right. So, Rena, let's get you into this conversation. What should the consequences be?
Well, the consequences should be great, and they should be some that frankly are relentless. They shouldn't just end, it seems, when Joe Biden takes office. I think we ought to hold to account this president as well as his enablers, those in the administration as well as in Congress, who propped up a wannabe dictator who's been putting our country on the course to autocracy for quite some time now. And Bonnie, you know me, I've been coming on this show now for the better part of a decade, and I've been a staunch fiscal conservative. I've supported Republican lawmakers and those running to be in Congress for so many years. And I've not bent over backwards, but I will say I've made extreme allowances to understand the side of conservatives and how they feel and how they feel marginalized by the media. But what we saw on Wednesday, I had a front row seat to that. I'm actually have a bit of an emotional hangover from it all. I was unexpectedly in front of it all for about 5 hours without any escape. I was at 101 Constitution Avenue on the rooftop of that building, just next to a tent erected by Alex Jones, a very known conspiracy theorist who's been banned off several platforms for the hate and violence that he incites. I think Senator Mitt Romney's words were spot on Wednesday night from the Senate chamber, in which he said this was an insurrection that was incited by the President of the United States. We have to say it very plainly and very clearly what it was. Donald J. Trump does not deserve to be in the Oval Office for another 2 weeks. I hope that the cabinet, though they be his loyalists, will do the right thing. We've seen some small resignations here and there. There are talk of some bigger ones on the Hill. I can tell you, I've definitely had some friends who are toying with leaving their leadership offices, GOP leadership offices. I think what happened on Wednesday, as a former Hill staffer, it was just unconscionable. I, on every level, feel so emotionally shaken that this is the state of our country. When I watched the protesters make their way through the cleavage between the Senate chamber and the main building, which houses the dome, the Capitol dome, I felt something inside me so very scared and so absolutely shaken to my core about what was about to happen in our country. I feared death and violence. What I saw in the aftermath
And there
when I woke
was
up.
death. There were 4 deaths.
There were 4 deaths, but I feared that lawmakers' lives were on the line. People like former Congressman Donna Edwards, who I, as a young Hill staffer, would get to walk next to and would get to see on a relatively regular basis. People like Deb when she was on the Hill with her husband. I mean, this is when you work on Capitol Hill, it's a family. You're not a Republican, you're not a Democrat, or at least it used to be that way. 10 years ago, when I packed up my bags to leave and become a political operative, I remember a place that embraced people regardless of party lines. I'm horrified as to what the state of affairs is in our country, because if it's this way, if it's lawmakers who are Republicans standing on the House floor on Wednesday night saying this was Antifa, when we know full well that the president signaled the Proud Boys in a debate with Joe Biden, what are we doing here? Are we lying to ourselves here? Do we not care for one another anymore? What are we willing to treat each other like anymore? Black and brown lives, it seems, matter less.
But let me ask you this moving forward. There have been nothing but lies since the beginning from this administration. Joe Biden has a big basket of eggs that he's got to sort through as president. If he does all this retributional stuff, with which the 80 million people who voted for him, many of whom want him to take retributive action, what does he do to the 71 million people, or 74 million people, I'm sorry, who voted for President Trump? Or is it a lost cause to get any of those people to ever consider supporting a Democrat or supporting a united country? I mean, really what we saw this week was the beginning of the Civil War again, or the run-up to the Civil War, where Senator Sumter was beaten into complete disability for the rest of his life by another member of Congress with his cane, because the factions were so horribly, were hating each other, just like we have on Capitol Hill today. How does Biden balance those two things?
I look, Bonnie, I think that Biden balances it by governing, but you cannot look past this. If we look past what happened this week, then we will be complicit in endorsing that kind of behavior for the future. And so there's plenty of video out there. The FBI, law enforcement, his independent Department of Justice, now going to be headed by Merrick Garland, should be reviewing all of that video, looking at all of those faces, identifying these people as domestic terrorists and prosecuting them. And as far as the lawmakers go, I think if Kevin McCarthy is serious about moving forward, then he needs to strip them of their committee assignments. If Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell are serious, they need to pull back on the seditious 6 in the Senate, and then the 138 or so in the House who supported this sedition and this insurrection. I think that there is no more excuse. I worked in those buildings for almost a decade, and I am undone with my emotion about how I feel of seeing those historic windows bashed through and Confederate flags marched through the statuary hall. I mean, this is not acceptable. We need to identify them, we need to prosecute them, and we need to hold them accountable.
Let's move to a couple of other things. Twitter temporarily closed the president's account. Facebook is now doing the same. How much are the media responsible for allowing the president to propound his insurrectionist, seditious message.
I mean, I think that there's a lot of complicity, frankly. All of the better part of 4 years where every single rally, every single event was televised, sort of from one end of the microphone to the other end of the microphone. There was a point at which some of the media outlets stopped covering him, which I think was really important. But, there's a lot of blame to be cast. But it really rests with leaders and lawmakers who sat quietly. We have the resignations that have taken place this week of Mick Mulvaney and other administration officials. Too little, too late. They don't get a pass. They don't get to be heroes because they decided to walk away at the point that there was insurrection, when they didn't walk away when everything else was going on with this administration. There's a lot of accountability to go around.
But Bonnie, to your question about the role of the media and social media, I think the media, because it chose how to cover and what to cover of the administration, focusing on those high value, high shock value opportunities and less on policy, that's what drove the president to utilize social media to get his messages and to get his accomplishments out there. Like it or not, that's what happened. And so I think when we think about the role of the media, there are a lot of people who don't trust the media because of what they choose not to cover. And I'm not just saying that. When you look at Pew polling of the public's perception, people are worried that there's so many stories that do not get covered. And I think the Hunter Biden story is an interesting example towards the tail end of this election cycle. But if you really want to think about how to, what really gave the president a lot of power and why he turned to social media, it's because the media chose to use the rallies and the things that seem to be shock value over the actual accomplishments or the policies that were enacting. And I think that was a detriment to the American people.
To the question of can Biden fix this all? Can Biden unify us? I mean, what was really put on display this past week is how awful leadership we have in federal government. I mean, truly, we need to elect better leaders at all levels of U.S. government, because Biden can't fix this and none of them can fix it either. It's incumbent on each of us. And I must say, that is what our founders wanted. They wanted each of us to do our part in order to strive towards a more perfect union, for this nation as a whole to strive towards a more perfect union. I wake up in the morning and I have 2 kids under the age of 5, and I listen to their cartoons. And the other day I'm listening to Clifford the dog on PBS talking about how together we achieve more and divided we fall. These are very elementary themes. These are basic themes that we give to our school children when they go to school. And what are we doing as a society when we allow each other to hate each other so much and to consume pieces of information that we know isn't right? And it's salacious material that's floating around masquerading as fact, but it's really just opinion. So the entire American media complex is so, I think, absolutely broken on every level that no one person can fix it. No leaders can fix it. Each of us have to take very responsibly our role. And number one, we should be canceling subscriptions to outlets we do not feel are doing their part. Just last year, I canceled mine to the National Review. I felt that the things that they are printing, I could no longer, in good faith, give them my money. And that's just one such example. And listen, this isn't about marginalizing conservative voices and giving rise to a supposed liberal media.
Even if CNN, ABC, CBS, PBS, you name it, were shut down totally, you would still have the dark web, and many millions of his followers are on the dark web. So my point is, mainstream media may not be the main perpetrators of this problem here.
I disagree.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think this is the reason that we can't think about this as policing mainstream media. Going on to those sources, I mean, those are the sources, frankly, that the president of the United States has been using to propagate and to incite. And so we have to take a different tack. But I actually do, Rena, believe that it begins with leadership. When you have your leaders who are unwilling to speak that truth to power, then you have a failed democracy. When you have people who are not able to say what the truth is and to face their constituents, even if their constituents want them to do something else. That's the test of courage. That's the test of leadership, not when somebody just sort of falls in to the crowd just because they don't want to have the incoming shots. And so I think that is one way that you begin to address people's access and use to this media that does not discern the truth. But I think we haven't also said enough about some of the really important and amazing investigative print journalism that has taken place over these last 4 years, because that is what has helped us to uproot some of this. And so let's not downplay that part of media in this environment as well.
Well, and then lastly, I remember, we're going on our 30th, the launch of our 30th season in 2 months. And I remember 25 years ago, if something like this had happened, the first thing I would have asked myself is, if women were in charge, would it have been any different? And of course, with the Capitol Police and what happened with what lots of people are blaming a lack of personnel, lack of preparation for the insurrection that did take place, the violence, the 2 pipe bombs that were found, one inside the Capitol, that all of this is preventable if they had been ready for the mob and had more armed Capitol Police or National Guard outside the various entrances to the Capitol, fending off the people who were trying to storm the Capitol. But in this case, we had Nancy Pelosi in charge on the House side and a man, of course, Mitch McConnell on the Senate. So, but that's not to say the National Guard is usually something called out by the president. But was there enough female involvement in looking at this thing beforehand, and who do we blame for the failure?
I don't know. I mean, to see what happened in that Capitol and to watch those pictures, first of all, I just don't understand how they could not have been prepared and fortified the Capitol. The Capitol right now doesn't actually have public visitors who are coming because of the pandemic. I think there are so many questions to be asked, and this is going to require a deep dive and investigation, because if these domestic terrorists could figure out how to breach the Capitol, then the foreign terrorists could figure out how to breach the Capitol.
What if this was a group of foreign nationals that were marching? Would it have been the same? What if it was
there were a group of Black Lives Matter protesters who were marching? Would they have been treated the same?
Well, and I remember, Bonnie, 4 years ago, I was part of the Women's March, and it was a great experience, but they tried to shut us down because there was a permit for 400,000 people, and millions showed up, and they were trying to tell the women and men who were there, my husband was there as well, that we couldn't march down Constitution Avenue because we had more people than the permit. If they were exercising that type of control over the Women's March, my God, you had every member of Congress on the Hill yesterday. A couple days ago, and the vice president there, and this is all they had?
I absolutely agree with you, ladies. We should have absolutely been on guard. And it doesn't matter who's protesting. If we're going to, if unfortunately we've entered into the world where peaceful First Amendment protests get hijacked. And so I think our law enforcement has to probably take that mindset that whether it's Black Lives Matters or whether it's MAGA supporters, they probably have to be more thoughtful about how the situation can escalate very quickly.
Rena, last word.
Well, I just cannot overstate, Bonnie, how dark Wednesday's events were for American democracy. It was a weekend of pathetic attempted coup. And though it was indeed still a coup. And even though 4 years of passion for populism has been there, and a near public loyalty to the president was there. Congressional Republicans still resisted the urge to do the right thing. There were still those who objected to the Electoral College's vote being certified. So look, it's certainly never positive to get this close to the brink of constitutional collapse, but there were profiles in courage, and that was there was a very slim account of American heroes. Recounts in the past suggested that when basically the strength of America has hinged on bravery and the conscience of its people, it's only been a few good stewards who will say, let's hold on to our sacred tradition. So what this week really highlighted for me at the end is that our democratic institutions have held. They bent, but they didn't break. And Trump was defeated, and he's now surely going to be permanently disgraced. So I think what we have now is a new urgency to work for civic renewal. We have to strengthen the bonds that unite us and build the capacity for change. I know it can be done. I really believe in all of us to be a part of that.
All right. Thank you all so much. We will be watching the developments as President-elect Biden becomes President Biden, and see if at all possible, if this country can be reunited, or at least to the point where the two sides can work together. That's it for this edition. Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Please visit our PBS website, www.pbs/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, please join us next time.
Funding for To the Contrary provided by the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation, the Colcom Foundation, and the Charles A. Freoff Foundation. For a transcript or to see an online version of this episode of To the Contrary, please visit our PBS website at pbs.org/To the Contrary.
Be more PBS.